The desert did not breathe in those first 3 seconds. Those hands save lives. Someone muttered, "They'll never take one." They didn't know Sergeant Riley Doc Hale. Not yet. 30 seconds later, the lens found her crouched in the shade of a shredded medical tent at FOB Ironveil, stitching torn flesh with the same quiet precision she once used to mend fishing nets in Texas. Dust clung to her hair. Sweat ran down her temple, but her grip never faltered. Helicopter rotors beat the air, stretchers clattered, and gunfire echoed. Riley moved like the still eye of a storm. Her father had come home from Vietnam with both medals and scars. He taught her 2 truths: never waste a breath when someone's life hangs on it, and always respect the silence between heartbeats. Those lessons lived in her fingers. At 18, she enlisted not to fight, but to heal, combat medic. Pain would follow, but so would purpose. At Ironvale, purpose arrived every dawn. In weeks, she had pulled Rangers, SEALs, and infantry back from the edge, earning the name Doc. Among warriors who rarely praised outsiders, that name meant acceptance until this day. Sirens split the base. The Call Seawolf team pinned outside Outpost Echo 6, 12 clicks east. 1 man down. Evac 20 minutes out. Riley grabbed her kit and sprinted to the landing zone. The Seahawk hammered down in a storm of grit. She dropped beside the casualty. His vest was soaked dark red, his skin ash pale. The name tape read, Morrison. Each breath rattled like broken glass. Her hands moved without hesitation. Pressure here. IV line there, voice steady. "Stay with me. You're not leaving this desert tonight." Mortar blasts shook the ground. Seal eyes locked on her, hard, mistrusting. She was an outsider with a cross on her sleeve, holding one of theirs in her hands. She didn't flinch. She stemmed the bleeding, sealed the wound, and stabilized Morrison for the dash to the field hospital. As they lifted him onto the stretcher, his hand clamped weakly on her wrist. One word rasped, "Thanks." Chief Jake Rodriguez, Seawolf commander, studied her through the rotor wash. 15 years had trained him to spot the rare ones. His verdict was simple: outstanding work. "Doc, Morrison owes you his life." That night, she overheard whispers their sniper had been pulled out. Missions crippled without overwatch. Riley sat alone, fingers brushing her father's photo. She had always been a healer, but could those same hands steady a rifle? The question lodged deep, waiting for its moment. The convoy moved with a dull, practiced rhythm until Marcus Roach Hale's hand sliced the air and everything froze. He raised binoculars, jaw tight, then lowered them with a look that didn't need words. Trouble. Across the valley, men were bracing a machine gun nest into place, a dark knot on the ridgeline, nearly 1,000 meters out. The route they'd trusted for weeks had just turned into a kill zone. Inside the second MRAP, Riley Doc Hale felt the tempo harden. Chief Rodriguez barked orders: radio the column, dismount, find cover, but everyone knew the math. Their sniper was still in recovery. Overwatch was a hole in the team. If the gun opened up, they'd be trapped. Through borrowed glass, Riley studied the valley, the way she once studied anatomy under surgical lights: calm, methodical. Her father had taught her that terrain spoke if you listened: the twitch of grass under a quartering wind, the drift of dust where the air curled. Patterns, not chaos. "Range?" she asked quietly. "About 980. Roach answered. Men turned, eyes narrowing. A medic did not volunteer for a shot like that, but the situation had no space for protocol. "I can do it," Riley said. Her voice carried no bravado. It carried hours of breath control, nights memorizing wind shifts, and a childhood where patience behind a rifle was ritual. The team had seen her steady hands on torn flesh. Now they would see them on a trigger. Roach hesitated, then handed over the team's M110 class precision rifle. Heavier, less familiar, but mechanics were mechanics. She settled behind the weapon, exhaling into a ritual she already knew: preparation, calm, inevitability. The convoy held its breath. The world collapsed to one scope, one silhouette, one sequence of urgencies: grass bending east, dust spiraling south, the rise of a target's chest. She moved as if seconds were currency, and she refused to waste one. The shot was not violence but punctuation. A squeeze. A crack echoing across the valley, and the figure at the gun folded. For a frozen heartbeat, no one moved. Then the threat melted away. Men trained to bury awe let it escape in the noise of exhaled relief. Rodriguez approached, hand on her shoulder, not to steady her, but because words were clumsy here. "You just saved every man in this convoy," he said. "That's math no one argues with." The convoy rolled again. Radios filled with ragged laughter, profanity born of survival. Morrison, pale but alive, reached out to squeeze Riley's hand. Gratitude etched in silence. But beneath the relief, something shifted. She was no longer just their medic. She was proof of what should have been impossible. By the time they reached FOB Ironveil, whispers had already outrun them. A medic had dropped a machine gunner at nearly a kilometer. In the briefing room, Colonel Evelyn Carter listened without blinking. When the debrief ended, she asked one question flat, heavy, inescapable: does she want to take it further outside? Riley sat with the rifle case open and a photograph of her father tucked inside. Her hands trembled once, not with fear, but with the knowledge that a door had been nudged open, somewhere down the hall. A phone clicked on. A call went higher than Ironvale. Ordinary in sound, extraordinary in consequence. They looked at her like they'd seen a ghost in scrubs carrying a rifle. For a long, suspended beat, nobody spoke, only the valley answered, the wind carrying the ghost of the shot like punctuation. Riley Hale lowered the scope and felt the ground tilt a degree she hadn't expected. She had gone into that fight to heal. She had come out having quietly rewritten what everyone at Ironvale thought she could be. Chief Jake Rodriguez stared at her with a kind of stunned respect that took years and hard missions to earn. "Holy hell, Doc," he said finally, voice rough with something like awe. "Where did you learn to shoot like that?" Riley's fingers, still warm with adrenaline, found the small photograph tucked inside her rifle case, her father younger, grin crooked. A man who taught patience the way some teach prayers. "He taught me," she said. It was the simplest truth-hunting trips at 12. Long afternoons at dusty ranges. A childhood where reading wind and distance was ritual. Word moved through the Seawolf team like a rumor on the wind. By the time the convoy rolled back inside the wire, every operator had a story. Every story made what happened sound more impossible. In the chow tent, men nudged one another and replayed the silhouette on the ridge. In the comms shack, someone clipped audio and fed it up the chain. The base that had always known Riley as the woman with the steady hands now looked at her as someone who'd solved a problem they'd be arguing about for months. Rodriguez began treating her differently: quiet, careful shifts in how he included her. He asked her about range cards and wind patterns during lulls, not because he distrusted his own men, but because he'd seen how she read the landscape with the same patient curiosity she used when treating a bad wound. On slow nights, he'd slide a coffee into her palm and say, "You ever think about taking those skills somewhere formal?" Riley would smile and trace the cup rim, thinking of stitches and IV lines and the faces that drifted in the dark when sleep wouldn't come. Intelligence flagged a high-value target 12 clicks out an enemy commander whose removal would loosen a choke on convoys. Rodriguez's request that Riley accompany the team as medic and backup marksman rippled past Ironvale into regional command. The briefing that received the request was small and smelled of cold coffee. Maps lay spread across the table like the skin of a thing ready to be read. The idea of putting a medic on the firing line as anything more than a contingency offended doctrine in the abstract. But doctrine bends when lives and logistics hang in the balance. And it bends more for men who can make commanders trust their judgment. Colonel Evelyn Carter listened, fingers tapping the map in a slow, patient rhythm. Her face was a mask of measured calculation. "We can't rewrite training for one person," she murmured. "But we can exploit an asset." The plan was surgical insertion under darkness, establish overwatch at roughly 800 meters, observe, and if the target presented, eliminate. Riley's role was written plainly: medic first, marksman second. The room exhaled, and they moved. They moved like ghosts. The insertion was clean. Riley carried both a medkit and a precision rifle slung beneath her cover and awkward. Intimate weight that felt like two selves strapped to one back. The watch was a study in stillness, hours of nothing. Then the slow, electric life of dawn. Through the scope, the world narrowed to crosshairs and the habitual movement of a compound waking. Rodriguez took the primary position. Riley settled into the backup role, looking at the same slice of dirt, but tallying risk the way a medic tallies pulse and perfusion. Then, the tiny, brutal betrayal. Every shooter fears Rodriguez's rifle suffered a mechanical failure at the worst possible moment. The target began to move toward cover as if on cue. Time compressed. Rehearsed cadence scrambled. Rodriguez cursed low and fast, then looked to where Riley had been watching all along. Her rifle was already trained on the throat of the earth where the commander would cross. Without hesitation, she stepped into the sequence she'd only ever practiced in afternoons and competitions, this time with moonless sky. Intelligence on the line, and men's lives threaded to a single decision: her breath, her cheek on the stock. The micro-adjustments invisible under pressure, all of it clicked into place like a surgeon finding a vein in the dark. The shot landed clean. The man dropped. Silence rolled back over the ridge. Then a slow, stunned roar as radios and mission control found their voices. Skeptics stared not at her but at the place she'd been aiming from, as if they needed witnesses to this rearrangement of roles. On the ride back, the team moved with a new gravity. Military culture measures extraordinary acts with a private language. There were no parades, only the weight of consequence. Colonel Carter read the after-action in a small windowed office and called Riley in alone. Light from a single lamp threw the young sergeant's shadow long across the map. "You did what few could," Carter said. Her voice held no flourish, only consequence. "That shot changed a lot of assumptions. It also creates a problem I don't want to ignore." Riley's hand went to the photograph of her father again. The room felt suddenly very small. "We can put you where your skill is most useful," Carter continued, "but it won't be comfortable. Sniper school, real school breaks a lot of people." She let the words hang, the air thick enough to hold a life-changing decision. "Are you prepared to leave being a healer behind, even for a little while? Because if you go through that door, there's no easy way back." Outside the tent, the bass hummed on, oblivious. Inside, Riley heard a radio click in a distant tent and felt the world she knew tilt towards something new and dangerous. There was a silence before she answered, a silence that tasted like the edge of a blade. She swallowed, looked at Colonel Carter, and said, very quietly, "I want to try." Carter's face tightened, then softened into resolve. She picked up the phone on her desk. The line clicked. Connected. And a name was spoken that reached farther than Ironvale itself. The next step had begun. The barracks at FOB Ironveil carried a new weight after that mission. Men who once saw Riley as just their medic now watched her with a quiet respect reserved for those who'd done the impossible. She felt it in glances. In the silence that followed her into the chow hall, the rifle case in her hands had become more than gear. It was a question mark hanging over everything. Rodriguez didn't let it fade. He began pulling Riley aside during down hours, handing her range cards, asking for her read on shifting winds. He spoke less like a superior and more like someone testing the edges of a possibility. "You see details others miss," he told her one night over burnt coffee. "Not just wounds, terrain, time. That matters." Riley gave half a smile, but her fingers brushed the edge of her pocket. The reminder of where it had all begun never left her. The whispers reached Colonel Evelyn Carter faster than Riley expected. In the command tent, Carter's presence was sharp as glass efficient, unsentimental. She had read the report's precision kills, both outside Riley's assigned role. Doctrine said medics weren't snipers. Reality was harder to ignore. "You've crossed a line," Carter told her. "It isn't punishment, it's potential. But you can't be both forever, if you want this. You go through the fire like the rest." The fire meant one thing: the Army's sniper school. Weeks of psychological grind, technical mastery, and an attrition rate that chewed through men twice Riley's size. Carter gave her 72 hours to decide. Riley's answer came the same way her shots did: steady. Without drama. "Yes, ma'am." That night, Rodriguez found her on the range. Rifle laid out, the air cool with desert dusk. He handed her a fresh set of ballistic charts. "Consider this your warm-up. Fort Benning won't care who you've saved. They'll only care if you can disappear in grass and put steel on target." When dawn came, the unit gathered at the landing zone. The Seawolf team stood silent as Riley boarded the transport bus that would carry her east. Rodriguez gave her one last look, not of doubt, but of belief sharpened by war. The door slammed shut. Engines roared, and for the first time since she enlisted. Riley Hale was leaving the battlefield not as a medic, but as a candidate for something far more dangerous. The ride to Fort Benning felt longer than any convoy Riley had ever taken. When the bus rolled through the gates, she knew this place would test her more than combat ever had. Day one stripped away illusions. Humidity clung like a second skin. Instructors barked until voices cracked, and classmates sized her up as the one who wouldn't last. Out of 24, she was the only medic and the only woman. Sergeant First Class Thompson gave the warning, 60% of you won't make it. His stare lingered on Riley. Message received. The first week nearly broke her. Every trigger pull dissected, every breath judged, every mistake magnified. 3 candidates dropped before Friday. Doubt gnawed at her, but she held on. Then came fieldcraft. Hours crawling through brush, vanishing into shadows. This was where Riley found her footing. Years as a medic had taught her patience, stillness, attention to detail. On the night stalk, she slipped past instructors, found both targets, and melted back into the dark. At dawn, Thompson pulled her aside. "You're not here by accident. Keep this up." She stopped trying to match the others. Where they leaned on brute strength, she relied on precision. Where they rushed, she endured. Her scores climbed, and the skeptics fell quiet. Graduation arrived with half the class gone. Riley stood near the top when Colonel Carter pinned the badge to her chest. A murmur rippled across the yard. A medic turned sniper, something unheard of. Back at FOB Ironveil, Rodriguez met her on the landing zone, grin wide. "Welcome back, Doc, or should I say, Sniper Hale." From then on, missions came fast, high ridgelines, convoys crawling below, terrain that punished impatience. Riley studied maps like anatomy charts, reading wind and distance as pulse and breath. Her rifle became a scalpel cutting threats before they could bleed into disaster. Then came the mission that would etch her name into the unit's history: Dawn in the Hindu Kush. A high-value target stood at more than 1,200 meters. Winds shifted. "The shot unforgiving," Rodriguez whispered. "No one makes that shot." Riley steadied her scope. She exhaled, pressed the trigger, and silence swallowed the ridge. The target dropped. The impossible had become real, lowering her rifle. Riley felt the weight of both identities pressing into one: the medic who once carried bandages, the sniper who now carried the fate of missions. They were never separate. They were one. From healer to sniper, Riley Hale proved that the sharpest edge is forged where mercy meets precision.